To my experience, whenever we gather to talk about rationalism, we typically contrast that with religious faith because religion is irrational. It's difficult to reason someone out of religion because reason was never what got them in there. But that's not the only area where people are typically irrational. There's another application that's just as bad and even more common. When I was a boy, my dad told me never to talk to people about religion or politics. And I ignored his advice because I was naive. But politics shouldn't be about faith or dogma or anything you have to believe or be damned if you don't. Instead, we're talking about providing laws and governance for communities, dealing in trade and so on. And what is unreasonable about that? There's every reason that we should be able to work to mutual benefit, but we don't. Even though I've spent my life trying to reason against faith, I don't get hate mail from believers, but I get volumes of hate from other atheists over political differences. Especially the perception of right-wingers versus the left. So we're in Europe right now, and you all tend to lean a little bit more left than my country does. So if we're going to talk about irrational politics, especially after the last election, we're going to talk about the USA. Over the last few years, I've spoken in 17 countries on 4 continents about the American political situation. And when my fellow Americans see those videos, they criticize me, saying I shouldn't be talking negatively about the United States when I'm in a foreign country, as if y'all wouldn't know the depth of our situation if it wasn't for me spilling that secret. In every country I went to during the presidential primaries last year, people in every country said to me, "Wow, Trump, how'd that happen? Y'all need to get rid of him. You need to elect Bernie." I heard that everywhere I went, not just in Europe and Canada, but also in India and the United Arab Emirates. And of course, my friends in Australia said the same thing. They all said we needed to elect Bernie. Somehow or other, Hillary's name never came up. And back then, I was so hopeful. Even though we are owned and controlled by our pharmaceutical and fossil fuel industries, it looked like we were going to finally have a national health care system like the other advanced first world nations. And we had new technology for better and faster electric cars with different types of batteries using, half a dozen different types of batteries using different materials. And it looked like we were going to finally invest in clean energy systems, like wind turbines and solar farms and tidal generators and so on, because we didn't have another 4 years to go backwards, polluting our country or polluting the planet worse than we ever have before. And Bernie said that we needed to take environmental action immediately and with urgency. But when Hillary took over, she said that incremental baby steps would be good enough. And I saw that as an example of the corporatocracy's influence over our presidential campaigns. And we saw that more clearly when my wife and I went to Standing Rock. There, several Native American tribes and many other allies, including movie stars and thousands of U.S. military veterans, gathered to protest the Dakota Access Pipeline. It was the largest such standoff in American history, but the mainstream news media wouldn't cover it. Because every financial institution that Bernie had complained about was invested in that pipeline. Everybody from Goldman Sachs to Wells Fargo. Donald Trump reportedly had $1 million of his own money invested in it as well, as did, I don't know how much, but Obama and Hillary reportedly also were invested in that. So what we saw at Standing Rock was a demonstration of the very 1% establishment oligarchy that Bernie always railed against. And the reason the mainstream media refused to give that story the coverage that it deserved was because if they did, then Americans would see that the corporations who really run our country are going to do whatever they want to do, and it no longer matters what we the people have to say about that. So it's no surprise that Bernie was the only politician speaking out against the pipeline or for the water protectors. And while we were there, Hillary issued a public statement as well, but in favor of the pipeline, despite all the atrocities going on by the state against its own people. And I could spend another 20 minutes just talking about what North Dakota had done to those the water protectors and how they violated every provision of their rights as guaranteed in the First Amendment of our federal Constitution, especially freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and freedom to peaceably assemble, all suppressed by the outrageous tactics of the state. Standing Rock gave us a demonstration of where the nation was going to go if we didn't vote out the establishment, the millionaire class, and head in a different direction. The issue was environmental, which is an incredibly hot topic in the United States. The Sioux tribes called themselves water protectors because they were protecting their one and only water source. They knew that all of our pipelines leak poison, whether it's oil or gasoline, and there were hundreds of pipelines leaking thousands of gallons all across the country at the same time. The more the public became aware of this through social media, the more they heard about the water cannons and tear gas grenades and attack dogs and rubber bullets that were being used by militarized police against peaceful, unarmed hippies, the more that they began to petition the president to do something to stop it, which he eventually did. To his credit, Obama halted the project completely. And I think that Hillary would have stood by that action because she has shown that she can alter her position by, according to public demand. But she's not the one who took over command. Instead, my country lost its mind and elected an unqualified, incompetent madman. Trump will not be reasoned with because he doesn't understand things. Public opinion is that he's limited to a fourth grade reading level, and Gallup polls show that 2/3 of Americans doubt whether he can even handle the presidency. He's not a leader of people. He only cares about profit, and he has no competence even in that. So he ignored the precedent of the previous president and revived the pipeline and pushed it through anyway, despite public outcry, which he then pretended that he never knew about. Because when has he ever been honest about anything? He has no ethical compunction, no appreciation for science, and thus no concern for the environment either. He thinks global warming is a hoax. The Republican Party is the only major political party in the world that denies anthropogenic climate change. The National Party platform says that the environment is improving every year and that it will continue to improve regardless of regulation. So I guess it doesn't matter that Trump made it legal for coal plants to dump their refuse directly into our streams and rivers because he believes that the environment will somehow protect itself, regardless how many chemicals our industries pump into it. And many people have told me that they don't believe that humans even can affect the environment no matter what we do. And with that excuse, we can do whatever we want and never be responsible for anything, even our own demise. The Republican Party platform goes on to say that the predicted crises of climate change are an illusion created by environmental extremists in the Democratic Party. But why would the Democrats orchestrate such a hoax, especially knowing that so many of them were invested in that pipeline? That would be a conflict of commercial interests. The national platform is much tamer than when you look at the individual states. For example, back in 2012, the Texas Republican Party platform said, "We object to critical thinking." More specifically, they object to teaching higher order thinking skills that would undermine parental authority and challenge a student's fixed beliefs. Now it says, "We support objective teaching and equal treatment of all sides of scientific theories, such as life origins and environmental change. These should be taught as challengeable scientific theories, subject to change as new data is produced. Teachers and students should be able to discuss the strengths and weaknesses of these theories openly without fear of retribution or discrimination of any kind." By this, they mean that they should be taught not as scientific theories, being confirmed hypotheses that have passed every test to be considered tried and true. Rather, Republicans think the word theory refers to empty assertions of blind guesses wild guesses and empty assertions of blind speculation unsupported by anything, just like their own beliefs are. Instead of teaching what these theories are, they want to teach what they are not. to misrepresent them, or to simply tell their students to stand up to experts and listen to pseudoscience quacks instead, because they want to promote their religious beliefs, and that's what they mean by teaching all sides. They want to teach alternative theories. You know what an alternative theory is? It's just like an alternative fact. It means it's a lie. And they want teachers to be preachers of religious myths instead of teaching anything that would qualify as an actual theory. So why do these Christians believe that global warming is a threat to their mythology like evolution is? It's not a theological threat. It's a commercial one. A candidate for the Texas State Board of Education last election said that climate change is a hoax invented by Karl Marx, and that it has nothing to do with weather or climate. It's all about system change from capitalist free enterprise to socialism/communism. Your information may be different. American politics have shifted so far to the right that liberals are considered leftists now, because in the fallacious world of false dichotomies, you're either far right or you're far left. And no one can consider centrist, because that would require nuance, and no one's capable of doing that anymore. Meanwhile, liberals and leftists are demonized together as socialists, and Americans think that socialists and communists are the same thing. To be fair, not all Republicans are religious. Demographics change, and the parties have switched places on some issues. When I was born, the Democrats were the religious right racists. Now, a pitiful few atheist Republicans say their party has been hijacked by the religious right. And the only other defense, otherwise, that they have against critics like myself is to say that there are bad Democrats too. But we're not talking about rare exceptions. We're talking about what it says in the Republican Party platform. And in Texas, it says that climate change is a political agenda promoted to control every aspect of our lives. That's what they say climate change is. And if that's not crazy enough, Donald Trump himself said that the concept of global warming was by and for the Chinese in order to make U.S. manufacturing non-competitive. Never mind that China is the new leader in fighting climate change, creating 13 million new jobs by investing $360 billion into renewable clean energy. Last year, all of China's new energy needs were met by wind and solar sources. So they erect another wind turbine every hour, and they're already the world's biggest producer of solar panels, and they're increasing their sales on electric cars 1,000% just over the term of Trump's presidency, while he, foolishly, is trying to reopen coal mines that will never produce jobs again because of automation. While China and the rest of the world pass us by, our economy and our environment are doomed under this myopic testament to the Dunning-Kruger effect. Trump doesn't learn, and neither does his party. In the mind of a Trump supporter, any graphs or charts of Obama's term compared to W. Bush's terms may as well be turned upside down, because they believe that the economic and employment trends were all better during Bush's term, and that somehow Hurricane Katrina is Obama's fault, even though that happened during Bush's term. And that's not even a joke. I've heard many people blame Obama for things Bush did. And everything that they criticize Obama for, all of the Republican presidents had done worse, and Trump is already worst of all just in his first 4 months. And just like with religion, you could prove the Trumpsters wrong with a moment on Google. But there's no information you can show them that will change their minds. When the polar ice caps melted for the first time in human history, you would expect that there would be an admission that maybe there's some truth to global climate change or global warming. No. Instead, Republicans said that was God opening up new opportunities for offshore oil drilling. Why is America going backwards on everything? Environmentally, economically, socially, politically, seemingly systematically undoing all the progress we've made in the last few decades. Just in the last few years, right-wing Republicans have done all they can to politicize the classroom, undermining education in science, sex, and social studies, allowing teachers to promote their religion and teach uncritical thinking, while right-wing legislators tried to disable public schools altogether, with some suggesting that poor children should not even have public schools to go to, but that they should return to the workforce. Right-wing Republicans have tried to hasten overpopulation and consumption of our resources and the destruction of the environment and endangered species while trying to establish an American theocracy and legalize hate crimes, depriving people of their rights, discriminating on the basis of religion, sex, and sexual orientation, as well as race, enabling child abuse and excusing child molestation while justifying slavery and violating every provision of the First Amendment, including the establishment of a state religion and prohibiting the free exercise of any other religions in its shadow. And as I predicted even before Trump was elected, he's now thinking about restricting or eliminating the First Amendment, the very thing that makes us a free country. Few Americans pay attention to the First Amendment. They usually fixate on that Second Amendment. That's the one that allows us to have guns. Because if we have our guns, if we have the right to have our guns, then we don't even notice when they take our other rights away. Back home in Texas, and I was witness to this, I was in the Texas State House, when they passed a bill so that everyone can carry a concealed weapon at all times for only $40. They want to make it cheap because they want everyone to carry a gun wherever they can. At the same time, they also passed laws restricting immigrants and promoting religious and ethnic profiling, such that Texas has suddenly become a land where you must be prepared to show your papers. Especially if you don't look right, if you're black or brown or might be foreign. Because now Americans can be jailed just for laughing at our politicians or for reporting the wrong story. And that wouldn't happen in a free country. You know, we're in Helsinki now. The Russian border is like 100 miles down the road. And I've never been so close to Russia geographically. But when I go back to the Lone Star State in the US of A, that will be closer to the Soviet Union politically than my patriotic parents ever imagined my country would be. Mr. Gorbachev, build up that wall in Texas. And Trump says he wants to make America great again, but he's taking away the very thing that made it great. The American dream was this idea that immigrants could flee dangerous environments of oppressive regimes with restrictive laws and religious persecution in other lands to come to our country, which is now imposing all of those things. But before our national motto of E pluribus unum was perverted into "In God We Trust," America was a melting pot wherein many different groups of people combined into one culture with secular laws and thus equal rights and opportunities for prosperity. Trump said the American dream is dead. And it's appropriate that he's the one who said that, since he's the one who killed it. We don't need a wall to deter illegal immigration. It's already down because nobody wants to move to America anymore. They'd rather come here where they can get free health care, where the people are happier, crime is lower, and the standard of living is higher. But don't tell my countrymen that because they think we're still number one. And you have to wonder about the judgment of our president and his advisors, if you can fairly call them that. Pulitzer Prize-winning conservative political commentator George Will recently said that Trump's speech patterns reveal a profound ignorance of whatever he's talking about, but also that his judgment of basic facts, or rather his rejection of them, suggests an alarming inability to even think sequentially. Mr. Will's unprofessional opinion is also backed by professionals. 35 psychiatrists, psychologists, and social workers penned a letter to the editor of the New York Times to declare Donald Trump mentally incompetent to serve as president. Dr. John Garner, a psychotherapist at Johns Hopkins, said Donald Trump is dangerously mentally ill and temperamentally incapable of being president. Garner said this is due to Trump's malignant narcissism, which he defined as a mix of narcissism, antisocial personality disorder, aggression, and sadism. There are others that we could throw into that list, but he's the professional. Garner said that Trump's narcissism impairs his ability to see reality, and you can't use logic to reason with someone like that. Not everyone agrees, however. One psychiatrist, Professor Alan Francis, co-author of a diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders, says that Trump may be a world-class narcissist, but that doesn't make him mentally ill, and that it's an insult to the mentally ill to lump them with someone like Donald Trump. I don't think the mentally ill are insulted by being associated with Donald Trump, or they wouldn't have voted for him. Then he made it legal for the mentally ill to buy guns. What sane person would do? Well, I'm sorry, it's Trump. Why did he do that? Maybe he just wanted to buy one himself. As an American, I don't want to be associated with that marmalade Mussolini. I mean, nobody thinks that I'm a typical American. But Trump is. He's a collection of all the worst stereotypes that Americans have, just being an ignorant and arrogant, lying, egotistical, sexist, hypocritical bigot. I think George Carlin put it best when he said, think of how stupid the average person is, and then realize that half of them are stupider than that. Now remember that 46% of Americans, roughly half, believe in creationism. So it's not surprising that Trump got 46% of the vote. Nor is it surprising that he staffed his cabinet with willfully ignorant, delusional cretins who reject critical thinking and believe impossible nonsense from a book of fables. Our Vice President, Mike Pence, is a science-denying creationist. And so is Betsy DeVos, the head of our Department of Education. As an activist advocating education myself, I'm embarrassed to talk about our schools in comparison to yours. I recently read that Finland routinely tops rankings of global education systems and is famous for having no banding systems. All pupils, regardless of ability, are taught in the same class. As a result, the gap between the weakest and the strongest pupils is the smallest in the world. Finnish schools also give relatively little homework and have only one mandatory test at age 16. That's impressive. And we are not so progressive. I complained to one of my neighbors that Finland has the best schools in the world and that America is not even in the top 10. I find it a little difficult to say we're number 1 when I know we're really number 17 or 37, depending on what you're measuring. But my neighbor didn't care about that. He said he didn't want the best schools in the world. And it's not that he's okay with piss-poor education. He homeschools his kids, and he doesn't want public schools at all for anyone. You don't need religion to make politics irrational. There are plenty of atheists with irrational politics too. Libertarians, for example, are against public schools because they don't want the government to provide anything. They want to privatize everything so that poor kids won't have equal standards or opportunity and can't even go to school at all. Just like in third world countries, which is where we're heading. There's been a concerted effort by believers and non-believers alike to undermine public schools by routing funding to private schools and charter schools, sending privileged kids there, and then overcrowding the underfunded public schools with underprivileged kids who were then subjected to testing and methods that we know are not productive. Then the state cut the budget in half so that the underpaid teachers are no longer contractually rewarded on the basis of merit. It's a system that seems suspiciously like it was designed to fail. Then you add religion and it gets even worse. Religion is a means of manipulation of the masses, and the best way for religion to indoctrinate is through schooling sequestered children. But many Republicans say that public school is a tool of the devil because they're secular, and therefore you can't teach the fear of God. If they teach science and sex and social studies properly, factually, without special provisions catering to Christian values, then the Christians regard those facts as a deceptive tool of perversion. And since they won't teach about sex or any sort of birth control, then we have the highest rate of repeat teen pregnancy, with more and more kids being born into poverty. Then the state responds to that by cutting all of the welfare programs that would have helped the situation they created. And believers complain that understanding evolution is somehow a violation of their freedom of religion to believe in fables instead. So our schools are not about understanding reality. They're about controlling what the kids believe and how they vote. Because Trump just made it legal for the churches to lobby and finance candidates. So how much more corrupt and how much more corrupt will religion be? And how much more religious will our politicians be now? They've always wanted a system that rejects understanding to preserve a preferred delusion, with all the prejudice and paranoia to bow to authority and vote as a bloc just like their ministers say. We're not just inculcating Christian converts, we're raising young Republicans, right-wing, reactionary conservatives whose religion and politics are both obviously irrational.